They gave me one rule before my first night shift in the Arctic. Don't fall asleep. Not try to stay awake. Not be alert. Just don't sleep. At the time, I thought it was about discipline. I was wrong. The night I broke that rule, something under the ice noticed me. I took the job because I was broke. Not dramatic broke. The quiet kind. The kind where you check your bank balance before buying food. And sometimes, you just don't buy it. I'd been an IT systems administrator for 6 years at a logistics company in Gothenburg. Stable, unremarkable. Then my girlfriend left, and I didn't fall apart all at once. It was more like a slow structural failure. I stopped showing up. They let me go. I spent the severance badly. Drifted north to Tromsø because someone once told me the winter darkness there was beautiful. It wasn't. It was just dark. So when I saw the listing, I didn't ask questions. Remote Arctic station. 90 days. Enough money to fix my life. 340,000 kroner. More than I'd made in 2 years. One requirement. Must tolerate isolation and non-standard protocols. That should have been a red flag. It wasn't. I applied before my laundry was dry at the coin-op machine I'd fed my second-to-last 100 kroner note into. The psych evaluation came 2 days later. Video call. A woman named Dr. Rask, maybe 50, short gray hair, flat clinical voice like a dentist explaining a procedure. She asked about sleep habits, substance history, hallucinations, family psychosis. She asked how I handled boredom. I told her I'd spent 6 years in IT administration. She almost smiled. 48 hours later, I had travel documents. No institutional logo, just a reference number and instructions. 3 days later, I was there, middle of nowhere. Just ice and silence. The journey had taken me from a commercial flight to Longyearbyen, to a chartered prop plane to a landing strip I couldn't find on any public map, to a helicopter that carried me over a landscape so vast and empty my brain kept trying to interpret it as a rendering glitch, like a texture file that hadn't loaded. The pilot didn't speak to me. Below us, ice stretched in every direction, broken only by dark seams of open water that looked like cracks in porcelain. The station sat on metal stilts above the frozen ground. No logos, no company name, just a building, watching something under the ice. A single rectangular structure, corrugated metal exterior, painted a red that the weather had mostly stripped to gray primer. Small antenna array on the roof, a wind turbine turning sluggishly in the constant low wind. The helicopter set me down. The pilot handed me my bag and lifted off without a word. I stood there watching it shrink into the colorless sky and felt the silence settle around me like something physical. There were only 3 of us. Gunderson, the supervisor, tall, early 60s, weathered face, hands that looked carved from ship timber. He shook my hand with a grip that was firm and brief and led me inside. Marin, the engineer, 40s, compact and quiet, with the economy of movement you see in people who've spent long stretches in confined spaces. She nodded when we were introduced and said hello and nothing else. I'd later learned she could go entire days communicating only in single words and gestures, not hostility, just deep, practiced conservation of social energy. And me. The interior was functional in the way all such places are. Low ceilings, fluorescent lighting, linoleum floors in a shade of gray-green that no one had chosen for aesthetic reasons. Central corridor with rooms branching off. Small kitchen. Bathroom with a shower that produced hot water most of the time. 2 sleeping quarters the size of ship cabins. A storage room. The monitoring room was at the end of a narrow corridor. It was the largest space in the station and the obvious center of its purpose. 3 desks arranged in a U-shape, each with a terminal. A bank of instruments along the far wall. Oscilloscopes, spectrographs, several machines with no visible manufacturer labels. 4 large screens, all showing waveforms. Slow, steady, almost like breathing. Whatever we were tracking, it was 300 meters below the ice. I asked Gunderson what the sensors were measuring. He said subsurface activity, in a tone that made it clear this was all the detail I'd be receiving. My job was simple. Watch the screens. Log any changes. Report anything unusual. Timestamp, terminal number, description. Severity from 1 to 5 based on amplitude and frequency. Gunderson said most shifts were uneventful. The waveforms drifted slowly, like tides. Every few days, maybe a minor fluctuation worth logging as a Category 1 or 2. Anything above Category 3, notify him immediately regardless of the hour. That's it. The first night, Gunderson sat me down. After dinner in the kitchen, he poured us both coffee. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't read, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You do not sleep during your shift. Not a nap. Not closing your eyes. Not even for a minute." I laughed a little. Said, "Yeah, obviously. That seemed self-evident. You don't fall asleep watching instruments." He didn't laugh. "If you feel tired, take stimulants," he said. "There's modafinil in the medical kit, caffeine tablets, dexamphetamine if it comes to that. Use whatever you need. But you do not sleep." I asked why. He took a sip of his coffee. He just said, "Continuous conscious observation of the monitoring systems is required. That's the job." That was it. No explanation. Just the rule. He stood up, rinsed his mug, and left. I sat there turning it over in my mind. Odd, but not alarming. I'd worked in server rooms where protocol demanded constant eyes on screens. Some systems just require a human witness. I figured it was a liability issue, a data integrity requirement. I didn't think much more about it. I asked Marin about the rule once, during one of her maintenance visits. She was recalibrating a spectrograph, her back to me. I kept it casual. "So, the no sleeping rule, what's that about?" She didn't turn around, just said, "Don't sleep," in the same tone you'd use to tell someone not to touch a hot stove. I didn't bring it up again. At first, everything felt normal, quiet, boring even. My shifts ran 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., the night shift, though night meant nothing when the sun never set. Late April, deep into the polar day, the light just circled the horizon in a long, slow arc, casting everything in perpetual amber twilight that made my internal clock feel like it was swimming. The waveforms moved slowly. Nothing ever really changed. I'd sit in the monitoring room watching them scroll, logging observations every hour on the hour even when there was nothing to observe. I drank coffee. I read from Gunderson's collection of Norwegian crime novels. I did stretches between the desks. The waveforms had a rhythm that was oddly soothing, Long, slow undulations, rising and falling over 20 to 40 minutes, almost meditative. But around the second week, something did. Every night, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., the signal would shift, just slightly. The first time, it was Terminal 2, the one Gunderson called deep field coherence. The frequency increased, cycle time dropping from about 35 minutes to 28. Amplitude dropped a fraction, as if whatever produced the signal had moved further from the sensors or gotten quieter. I logged it as Category 1. Over the next hour, it drifted back to baseline. I mentioned it at shift handover. Gunderson nodded. Thermal settling in the substrate. Nothing to worry about unless it sustains for more than 3 hours. Reasonable explanation. I had no framework for interpreting subsurface geophysical data, so I accepted it. But I noticed something Gunderson probably didn't intend for me to notice. When I told him about the anomaly, his eyes moved to the clock on the wall before they moved to me. He wanted to know when it happened, before he wanted to know what it was. Not enough to trigger an alert, but enough to notice. At first, I ignored it. That was a mistake, because it started happening every night. Same time, same pattern. Like something down there had a schedule. Around day 16, the fatigue started catching up. The perpetual daylight was more disorienting than I'd expected. My body wanted a normal sleep cycle, but the sun never signaled it was time. I'd finish my shift, pull the blackout curtain, and lie there trying to convince my body it was nighttime. Some days I managed 6 hours, others 4 or 5 of shallow, broken rest. I started feeling a cumulative softness at the edges of my concentration, like a photograph slowly going out of focus. That's when the drift started. I'd be watching the waveforms deep in my shift and realize I'd been staring at a terminal for some stretch of time without actually seeing it. Not sleeping, eyes open, body upright, but my mind had simply vacated. Like a cognitive screensaver, I'd blink, check the clock, and find 7 minutes I couldn't account for. The log entry I should have made would be blank. It happened again the next night, and the next. Brief episodes where my conscious awareness would thin out like a radio signal losing strength. A small death of attention. I didn't tell Gunderson. I should have. But I was embarrassed, afraid, not of whatever the rule was meant to prevent, but of being seen as unable to do a simple job. I increased my coffee, started doing push-ups between log entries. For a few days it worked. Then I found the logs. Day 19, I was reviewing the archive, compiling a weekly anomaly summary, and there it was. There was a gap. 14 hours. No one watching. The automated data collection had continued, so the waveform recordings existed. But no human logs. The staffing records showed the gap corresponded to a previous technician listed only as Huge T. During that gap, the signal spiked. Hard. Category 4. The highest I'd ever seen. Terminal 2, deep field coherence, sustained for nearly 11 hours. Amplitude tripled. Frequency accelerated to a cycle time of under 3 minutes. Then abruptly stopped. Back to baseline as if nothing had happened. Regular logging resumed 2 hours later under Gunderson's name. And the technician on shift that night? Gone. Removed from records. Contract terminated. Medical evacuation. Ref. Incident 09-Halvoy. No details. I searched the system for any file associated with Incident 09-Halvoy. The folder was encrypted, clearance level beyond mine. That's when I started paying attention, not just to the screens, but to everything. And that's when I noticed something else: the silence. Between 1 and 4 a.m., the station felt different, heavier. I need to be clinical about this. During the day, the station was quiet, the way all small, isolated buildings are. Electronics humming, metal groaning in the cold, wind outside. Normal quiet. But in those small hours, the silence became dense. It had texture, like the air pressure had shifted, though the barometer showed nothing. Like the air itself was listening. I'd find myself holding my breath without meaning to, as if my body was trying to be quieter, trying not to disturb something. I told myself it was fatigue and isolation. The brain is a pattern-seeking machine. In the absence of stimulation, it generates patterns from noise. Sensory deprivation effects, polar expedition psychology, third man syndrome. I cataloged what I was experiencing and filed it under expected psychological effects of extended Arctic posting. Rational, correct. But the waveforms were changing too, and that wasn't in my head. Then came the vibration. Starting around day 22 during those same hours, Terminal 2 would develop what I can only describe as a stutter. The smooth oscillation would develop brief, sharp irregularities, like someone plucking a string that was otherwise vibrating freely. Small enough to fall below Category 1 threshold. Technically not loggable, but consistent. I logged them anyway as personal notes. On day 24, I brought my compiled data to Gunderson. He looked at my notes for a long time. Then he looked at me, and I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly. The expression of a man doing a rapid calculation about how much to reveal. "You're observant," he said. "Keep logging them, and keep your attention on the screens during those hours. Don't look away. Don't let your mind wander. That's when it matters most." I asked when what matters most. He gave me a look that was almost apologetic. Continuous conscious observation. That's the job. On day 26, I took the modafinil for the first time, hands trembling, thoughts looping. 200 milligrams. Within 40 minutes, a brittle artificial clarity. Not pleasant, but functional. And that night, at 2:37 a.m., as I was writing my log, you couldn't hear it, only feel it, deep in your chest. A low, subsonic vibration just below the threshold of audibility. Not a sound. More a sense that the air itself was trembling. I checked every instrument. Nothing registered. Seismograph showed no activity. I placed my hand on the wall, the desk, the floor. Nothing. The sensation existed only in the space between my ribs, like something pulsing far below. It lasted about 20 minutes, peaking around 3 a.m., then faded. The waveforms returned to normal. I sat in the silence that followed and realized my hands were gripping the desk so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Every night. Same time. Getting stronger. And the signals? They weren't random anymore. They were syncing. By day 29, the phase synchronization between terminals 2 and 3 was unmistakable. Terminal 1 was beginning to show early signs of the same pattern. Multiple sensors, all reacting together. That's not natural. Thermal settling doesn't synchronize across multiple sensor arrays. Thermal settling doesn't develop a nightly rhythm that mirrors human circadian patterns. Whatever was being measured was responsive. It was, and I choose this word carefully, attentive. So I started digging, going through old files, system documents, anything I could access. Most administrative files were locked, but there was an unsecured directory of equipment specifications and calibration records. Among them, a technical document for the sensor array dated 11 years prior. That's when I found it. A report, buried deep. It described the sensor's function as monitoring subsurface coherence patterns and logging threshold proximity events. Dense academic language, references to standing wave formation in deep glacial ice and its correlation with something called observer-dependent field states. One line changed everything. Continuous conscious observation by a qualified human operator has been demonstrated to suppress coherence threshold escalation in controlled settings. The mechanism by which conscious attention affects subsurface field states is not fully understood, but is hypothesized to involve quantum decoherence effects analogous to those observed in double-slit experimental paradigms. I read it again and again. We weren't monitoring the signal. We were containing it. They weren't paying me to watch instruments. They were paying me to be the instrument. Something was down there, 300 meters below. Something that exhibited wave-like behavior responsive to the presence or absence of conscious human attention. When someone was watching, focused, maintaining the awareness of a waking mind, the signal stayed low and stable. Our job wasn't to watch. It was to be watching, because when no one is watching, it changes. That's what happened before. That's why the last guy disappeared. He fell asleep, and whatever is under the ice woke up. I confronted Gunderson on day 31, sat across from him at breakfast and told him what I'd found. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. How much sleep have you been getting? 3 to 4 hours, sometimes less. He nodded slowly. That's not enough. You need at least 6 hours off shift to keep your cognitive function adequate for effective observation. It's not just about staying awake. It's about the quality of your wakefulness. A tired mind watching a screen is not much better than an empty room. This was the closest Gunderson ever came to confirming what I'd found. He didn't deny it, didn't say I was wrong, just reframed it as a practical problem. Sleep better when you're off so your consciousness is sharp enough when you're on. He gave me zolpidem, 10 milligrams, for the start of my rest period, never during shift. Sleep deeply when you sleep, he said, and watch carefully when you watch. That's how this works. After that, I stopped taking chances. I used stimulants, barely slept, forced myself to stay sharp, focused, aware. The zolpidem gave me 7 hours of heavy, thick, dreamless unconsciousness, like being lowered into dark water. I woke feeling clearer than I had in weeks. Modafinil kept me crisp through the nights, a sustainable cycle or close to it. And it worked. The signals calmed down. The vibration faded. That night the waveforms were the quietest they'd been since my first week. All 4 terminals, smooth and stable. During the 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. window, nothing. No vibration, no thickened silence. Just me and the screens and the slow breathing of the data. For a while, everything was quiet again. 7 shifts of calm waveforms and uneventful nights. My weight stabilized. The tremor stopped. I started to think I could actually complete the 90 days, collect my money, and leave with nothing worse than an unusual story I'd never be able to share. Then I stopped sleeping properly. Not because I didn't try, because I couldn't. Day 39. The Zolpidem stopped working. Not that it stopped making me drowsy. It did. But the sleep changed. Instead of deep, dark unconsciousness, I entered something thin. I'd fall asleep and find myself in a state that felt like being awake in a room with the lights off. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake up unable to move. Sleep paralysis. I could feel my room, hear everything. The generators, the wind, the small creaking sounds of the structure. But I couldn't move. And I wasn't alone. Something was there. Not Gunderson, not Marin, not anything that belonged in a small metal structure bolted to the ice above the Arctic Ocean, watching me. I told myself it was neurological. Sleep paralysis is well documented, associated with the disrupted cycles, stress, and notably Zolpidem use. The sense of a presence is a classic feature. I repeated this like a diagnostic mantra while I lay frozen in my bunk. A misfiring of the brain's threat detection circuitry. Nothing more. And the worst part? I felt that same vibration. Not in the station. Inside me. The same subsonic pulsing, but closer. As if the barrier my conscious attention maintained was thinner in that twilight between sleep and waking, and something was pressing against it from the other side. The next night, the signal spiked again. Terminal 2, Category 2 deviation, beginning at 1 a.m. The stutter returned. The synchronization resumed. The vibration came back stronger than ever, a deep throbbing pulse in my sternum that made my vision blur at its peaks, even though I was awake, watching, focused. It didn't matter anymore. I logged everything, leaned closer to the screens, focused my attention like a beam, willing the waveforms to flatten, and they did gradually settle back toward baseline, but not all the way. A residual elevation in Terminal 2's amplitude persisted for the rest of the shift, a few percentage points above normal, as if the thing below had advanced slightly and, when pushed back, declined to retreat to its original position. Something had changed. Something had gotten closer. Gunderson checked the data. For the first time, I saw genuine concern on his face. He made a satellite call. I heard his voice through the door, low and rapid, words I couldn't make out. When he came out, he said a rotation team would arrive in 12 days, ahead of schedule. He restructured the shifts. I was on from 2300 to 0500 only, 6 hours instead of 12. "We need you sharp," he said. "We need you at your best for the core hours." The core hours, 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. More time to sleep, less time under strain, should have helped. But the paralysis episodes kept getting worse. Every rest period now, without fail. The frozen half-conscious state, unable to move, aware of the room, aware of something in the room, and always that vibration, pressing closer. A few nights later, it happened. Day 44. I hadn't truly slept in 3 days. The zolpidem produced only paralysis, not rest. I'd lie in the frozen dark for hours, enduring the presence and the vibration, and emerge more exhausted than before. Gunderson noticed. Maren noticed. I could see it in how they looked at me, the expression you'd turn on a cracking beam in a structure you were relying on for shelter. I was the beam, and I was cracking. I fell asleep. 2:47 a.m. Just for a second. Not a drift, not a blank spot. Actual sleep. True unconsciousness. My body finally overriding every chemical and psychological defense and simply shutting down. One moment I was watching Terminal 2, noting a Category 1 micro-deviation. That's all it took. When I opened my eyes, I was still in the monitoring room, sitting in my chair, screens in front of me, everything exactly as before. But something was wrong. The room was slightly darker, as if someone had dimmed the fluorescence by 10%, and the hum of the electronics had stopped. Perfect silence. The screens were flat. No signal. No movement. Nothing. All 4 terminals, flat horizontal lines, as if the sensors had stopped detecting anything at all, as if whatever was down there had stopped moving, or had arrived, dead. I couldn't move. The paralysis was complete. Same as in my bunk, but now upright in the chair, in the room where I was supposed to be the observer, the suppressor, the conscious element keeping the coherence threshold from breach. And I had failed. I had closed my eyes. I had stopped watching. The vibration was gone too, and somehow that was worse, because the vibration had been the sound of something trying to get through. Silence meant it had stopped trying, because it meant it didn't need to push anymore. The air changed, denser, thicker, slightly warm, wrong, because the monitoring room was always 16 degrees, and this felt like 22. And there was a smell, very faint, not mechanical, not chemical, organic, like standing in a cave system, deep earth and old water, and things enclosed for a very long time. Then the screens changed, all 4 at once. The flat lines developed a new pattern, sharp, regular pulses, identical across all channels. Same signal, same pattern, perfectly synchronized. The 4 separate sensors spread across a 300-meter array deep in the ice, detecting exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. Whatever had been distributed and wave-like had coalesced, become singular, not spread out anymore, not distant, localized, directly below me. One thing, one place. I tried to move, tried to scream, tried to wake up, because some part of me knew I was asleep, knew this was happening in the gap between my consciousness and the thing below, in the space I'd been hired to prevent. My hand was on the desk. I could see it. I could feel the surface under my fingers. I told my hand to move. I begged it. My index finger twitched, and the alarm went off, loud enough to shake the room. The sound was enormous, a klaxon I hadn't known existed, a deep, pulsing tone that shook the walls and the desk and my teeth. Lights surging to full brightness, then beyond, a white-out glare that burned through my paralysis like acid through cloth. I was on the floor. I didn't remember falling. Lights flashing. Systems screaming. Gunderson ran in. He must have been watching the remote feed, must have seen the flatline and started running before the alarm triggered. He was at the terminals, typing rapidly, face white. Marin right behind him, already at the instrument bank, pulling covers off equipment I'd never seen activated. They weren't monitoring anymore. They were fighting it. The waveforms were back, not normal, erratic, spiking and plunging in wild arrhythmic patterns. All 4 terminals screaming with data. Category 5. Whatever had been suppressed was fully active, and the instruments were struggling to contain the input, adjusting frequencies, triggering systems I didn't even know existed. Marin activated a piece of equipment that produced a low, targeted vibration I could feel through the floor. Counter-frequency, fighting the thing with its own physics. Gunderson was shouting into the satellite phone. I heard fragments. Threshold breach. Duration approximately 3 minutes. Observer incapacitated. Trying to push it back down. And eventually, they did. By 0600, the waveforms had returned to approximate baseline, with residual instability Gunderson said would take days to settle. The alarm was silenced. The satellite phone had been used 3 more times. But something had already happened. I could feel it. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and felt the aftershock trembling through me. The room still smelled faintly of caves. The warmth was fading, and in the center of my chest, where the vibration had lived for weeks, there was a new sensation. Not pulsing, stillness, a gap, as if something had been there briefly and left a space shaped like itself behind. Something had changed, not just in the station, in me. They evacuated me 2 days later. The rotation team came by helicopter. Not 12 days later as scheduled. 4 people, 2 replacement technicians, a doctor, and a woman who introduced herself only by a surname I won't include here. She conducted a 3-hour debriefing in my quarters while the doctor monitored my vitals. She asked me to describe everything in sequence, in detail. She recorded it. She asked specific questions about the flatline event, what I'd seen, felt, heard, whether I'd had a sensation of communication, of being perceived. I told her everything. Her expression never wavered. At the end, I asked her what was under the ice. She looked at me for a moment. Your contract includes a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I'd recommend reviewing it before you leave. Your compensation will be deposited in full, plus a supplemental payment for the incident. We appreciate your service. No explanation. Just money. And silence. I was flown out the next morning. Longyearbyen, Tromsø, Gothenburg. My apartment was as I'd left it, except dustier. A neighbor had been feeding my cat Diesel and reported he'd been fine, though moodier than usual. That was 9 months ago. Now I'm home. Normal life. Normal sleep. Mostly. The psychiatrist diagnosed PTSD from occupational trauma and prescribed sertraline, which helps with the anxiety. I haven't told anyone the classified details. I say I worked at a remote station and had a psychological breakdown from sleep deprivation, which is true as far as it goes. But every night, right before I fall asleep, I feel it again. That vibration. Faint. But there. Not in my chest anymore. Lower. Deeper. As if the pulsing I felt at Halvoy 9 followed me home, or found a resonance inside me it could use to continue its work from a distance. And every morning, it's gone. Like something only exists when I'm not watching. There was one line in that report I didn't understand back then, a passage I've thought about every day since. It should be noted that the observer effect is bidirectional. While conscious observation has been shown to suppress coherence escalation, sustained exposure to the coherence field may produce lasting modifications to the observer's neural architecture. Long-term monitoring personnel should be screened for evidence of entanglement persistence at regular intervals following deployment. Entanglement persistence. It changes the thing being observed, but it also changes the observer. I was never screened. No one followed up. The money appeared, and no one contacted me again. I don't know if it's because they don't care, or because they already know what happened and are watching remotely, or because what happened to me is expected and unremarkable within the context of their work. I think something followed me back. Or maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe I brought it with me, folded into the architecture of my sleep, a frequency my mind learned by watching it too long, a door that opens every night when consciousness dissolves and the watcher stops watching. Because last week, I woke up in the middle of the night, and the vibration didn't stop, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was still the one watching, or if something else was watching through me.